very proud to introduce you to Doug Tolchin, the founder of the Sea.flv Foundation, and to talk to you about the Sea.flv Marine Sanctuary.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present this constellation of ideas, or perhaps a bit of a vision to you all. I'd like to let you all know you're actually the first group to see the first beta version of a slideshow presentation of this. So I appreciate you all being willing to be sort of my beta version guinea pigs, and appreciate any feedback. You're also only the third group to which this meme, this naming, this concept has been presented. The first group to whom I had the privilege to present it to was to about a half a dozen top tribal leaders of the Lummi Nation, which is up in Whatcom County, where I've lived in Bellingham for the last 20 years. And the second group of people to whom I had the privilege to present this and have the patience to listen at great length was actually to Chief Phil Lane Jr., Chief Reuben George, John Raymer, and three of their environmental lawyers, and they were so gracious without even knowing me to invite me into the meeting at which they're putting some finishing touches on a new treaty. So you're the third group, and you're the first group in Seattle to hear this. And I guess I would like to start you may remember a little line from the Matrix movie when the Merovingian said to Neo, you come to me knowing what it is you want, but you don't know why. And I just want you to keep in mind as we look through these images and ideas, the why. And he kind of gave him a talk about how, without the why, you don't have real power. And if you want to really do something big like save the world, it's really important to know why and get it right. And what I'd like to suggest to kind of intimate to what I think is the reason why, the main reason, the central reason why this is, I hope, destined to happen, and if we keep this in mind, we'll be successful, is I would like to remind you all of a little prophecy that you've all heard probably many times, so I think it's worth restating and remembering and contemplating a little bit as we look through this. And it was a little prophecy made by actually the namesake of the city we're in, which is Seattle. And he said, as you may recall, what is man without the beasts? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from the great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beasts soon happens to man. All things are connected. That's a little somber tone. I promise you almost all the rest of the presentation is going to be positive. And in fact, I think those words in a way are really positive. When we think about what happens to the beasts, it's been a bummer. Yes, it's true, on average maybe 90% of the wildlife throughout the Salish Sea has been made to go away in the last 300 years since the Russians first came in and started scooping up the sea otters. Lewis and Clark came in the 1804 time. So we associate that way, but I think there's actually a great opportunity of hope in this saying that most people think is maybe a downer, because he says, whatever happens to the beast soon happens to man. Well, what if we bring the beasts back? What if we make them happy again and healthy again? Well, then that happens to us too. And that is what I propose we intend to achieve. Not only for ourselves and the Salish Sea and for the wildlife, but as a role model for the world. And I believe that we have the opportunity to do this here, do it quickly, do it with fun, and I think people around the world are going to notice it, and it's going to become a role model. So I guess I'd like to start by making sure, I know most of you probably know what the Salish Sea is in general, but I want to just say a number of things to make sure we're clear about that. First, so first of all, the Salish Sea is the second largest inland sea in North America. The largest inland sea in North America is the Gulf of California, also known as the Sea of Cortez. The Salish Sea itself is about 7,000 square miles of surface area. If we define the Salish Sea as being this mostly kind of saltwater area, it consists of primarily of three well-known, formerly named, well, still named bodies of water. The Puget Sound here in the south, Seattle around here in Olympia, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which connects the inland sea with the Pacific Ocean, which is out here, and then the Strait of Georgia up to the north. You'll see we have intentionally omitted the Canadian-U.S. border. That is a geopolitical arbitrary boundary, and we believe it's not relevant to the unique depiction, but the line of that boundary goes down to about the middle of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, kind of curves up here and cuts north, just north of Bellingham and the Nooksack River here. What you can see is about 75% of the Salish Sea resides in British Columbia, and only about 25% of it is here in Washington State. So British Columbia, and I believe Reuben George's First Nation in the Vancouver area and the Vancouver Island First Nations are really going to be the key to, 75% key to this solution. So those are the three areas. I think it's also important for us, because names and words have power, I think it's important that we all be clear on how did this name, the Salish Sea, come about. Well, of course it is related to the name Coast Salish Nations. But the idea was originally coined by a white guy in Bellingham, Washington, named Bert Weber. He was a Huxley College of the Environment professor, marine biologist, and that was in the 1980s. And he proposed it because he was actually very concerned. That was when the oil tankers were starting to come in, the oil refineries were being established. And he and many other marine biologists were very concerned about this and the threats, kind of like a Prince William Sound disaster potential and so forth. And they were having difficulties talking about this water body because it was very confusing names. So he suggested Salish Sea. He brought it to the Washington State Legislature in Cartography Division and was told, no thank you, not much interest in it, go away, don't come back. Fast forward over about a 20-year period, during that time, people just started kind of using it. They put it on a boat, some scholars used it in papers, this, that, and everything. And then, in 2008, summer of 2008, at the Coast Salish Gathering, Native Americans came together and said, let's call it the Salish Sea. And they proclaimed it at the Coast Salish Gathering. They didn't ask permission. They didn't go to the state, the province, they didn't ask permission. They just did it. They agreed. They did it, and according to the Coast Salish Nations, it was now the Salish Sea. That was 2008 in the summer. In 2009, the state of Washington formally adopted it, and Governor Greg Water said it's the Salish Sea. 2010, the province of British Columbia adopted it formally and said, yeah, it's the Salish Sea. 2010, 2011, the United States and Canada nationally said, Salish Sea it is. So now, at all these levels, led by the Coast Salish Gathering, the nations, the pebble spreading out, summer of 2008, within 3 years, by all the relevant powers, regional, federal, it's Salish Sea. And now, on Google Earth, if you go on it, it's Salish Sea. So, I think it's important to know about this stuff. So we're all on the same page. So, let's go here. Let's start at the macro and then come back to the micro. Planet Earth. How much water is on Earth? We all know that 70+% of the surface of the Earth is covered by water and ice caps, the ocean. And as a result, we all suffer from the illusion that it is some vast, unlimited thing. But actually, if you gather up all the water on the planet, all of it, the salt water, the ice caps, the frozen, the water in everyone's body in this room, in the air, the rain and the clouds, and put it into a sphere, that's how big it is. And everybody says to me, that can't be. That's not possible. Well, let me tell you, this is not my image. This is from the U.S. Geological Survey and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. But so you can understand that this is true, the diameter of that sphere is 860 miles. Cubic miles. And if you slice it into 40 slices, 400 slices, They're about 2 miles each, which is the average depth of the ocean. So you can see if you slice that ball into 400 slices and spread it around the world, you fill the oceans 2 miles deep. So I just want you to understand that that is accurate. Okay, that's all the saltwater. Well, we also know that only about 2 to 3% roughly of all the water on the planet is fresh water as opposed to salt water. So the little second blue ball is all the fresh water on the planet. Okay? Most of which is groundwater, and most of the groundwater which is not accessible to humans. That little third ball there, you see? You can almost not see it. That's all the water in all the rivers and lakes in the world. So you can see how easy it is to dig up fossil fuels, dig up other things out of the huge, earth, and just totally pollute the water. And we don't need all the statistics and EPAs and everything else, so that's why we have to close the loop on pollution. 0 is the right amount of technical nutrients or pollution that should be going into the water cycles. So I just want to put that into a little context. And it can be done. There's technologies, there's examples, and it can all be done. It just requires the will and the requirements. So about this map, I just want to point out an important thing. This line that you see going around that, those are the tops of all the mountains that surround us. That is the boundary of our watershed. Certainly very few people seem to have ever seem to understand what is the watershed in which they live. And I would suggest to everyone for their consideration. Some people think of their community as their neighborhood, their circle of friends, their city, their county, their state, their nation. And there's arguments for all that. I'd like to suggest we also think about our community as our watershed. Because what do we all have in common? It's the water, right? Inside, outside. So that is our watershed. All the water goes inward, down to the Salish Sea, through thousands of creeks and rivers. And on the outside, it sheds outward. So I believe this is the boundary of the community in which we all live. And this is our community. So I wanted to make that clear. Oh, one other thing I want to point out, and we'll see if we have time at the end, but this is not just to propose a Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary. You'll notice the second line there, it says Salish Sea Coastal Trail. An integral part of this vision is to put a coastal trail all the way along and around the marine sanctuary, from which people can do land-based watchable wildlife viewing, which is the ecological way to observe wildlife. We don't want a million more boats running around creating noise, freaking out the cetaceans. Okay, so, and by the way, you may not notice this right off, but from Olympia all the way up to Vancouver, we plotted this line exactly along the right-of-way, as they call it, of the Burlington Northern Southern Pacific Railway, which Warren Buffett, as you all know, bought a few years ago. And what we're going to do, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is we're going to do the first elevated bicycle and pedestrian pathway above those railroad tracks, probably 20 to 30 feet wide, all the way from Vancouver to Olympia. And I've calculated it's going to cost about $8 billion, which is only about half of the annual transportation budget of the state of Washington. It can be done. And I believe we can get the billionaires to pay for half of it. They took the Warren Buffett pledge. They said they're going to give away half of all their money. Why don't they start with that? And I think that's going to be very important and helpful. And I think people are going to come from all over the world to bike and walk. And not only is it going to be a pathway for bicycles and pedestrians, but for art and for marine biology, interpretive displays, and inspirational and places and parties, sort of like the Mile High. New York City, the High Line in New York City, and there's also a 1 mile example of this in Paris, France. But this is 200 miles from Vancouver to Olympia. And the nice thing is the land is already there, and actually I think Native Americans have a claim to that land, because I think they don't have clear title to it. This is actually my belief. And I think we're going to have a negotiation, and we're going to put that above it. And then I'd like to see the rail line underneath it repurposed away from industrial centricity and hauling toxics and trash to be pedestrian or passenger oriented. And while we're at it, electric or hydrogen fuel cell or hydrogen powered. So I want to redesign the railroad as well as put the pedestrian bicycle trail above it. It can be done. We just all have to decide. maybe like marijuana, we'll put it on the ballot, have the people vote on it, and then the government, our public servants, have to do it. And we don't really have to spend too much time trying to persuade them. We just tell them. Okay. So the Salish Sea, you can just kind of read this yourself. I just want you to know why this is important. It already is a marine sanctuary. It's been a marine sanctuary for sure ever since the Ice Age. It's just we haven't been treating it like one for the last 300 years. In fact, we've been treating it like the Salish Sea sewer. And that can change. The beauty of rivers and creeks is the moment you stop polluting them, you go to bed, you wake up in the morning, they're clean again. You just gotta stop doing the bad things. It's really simple. They try to make it very complicated and say they don't know why the bees are all collapsing stuff, but it's really simple. It's GMOs, it's pollution, so let's just stop doing these things. Okay, so what is the core vision statement of the Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary? I want to always come back again and again. It's about the animals. It's about the wild animals. It's also about the farm animals. That, by the way, in America, farm animals produce 130 times more sewage than all the humans put together. And it all ends up in the seas and the rivers and so forth. And then there's other issues even beyond that. But the happy thing is, the vision statement that I believe is central to the whole marine sanctuary vision is to restore Salish Sea wildlife populations to more than 50% of historic levels as soon as possible. And what does that really mean? Well, I think we're down, on average, depending on what species you want to talk about, to about 1 to 10% of what was here 300 years ago, before the Russian trawlers came in and scooped up sea otters for hats and coats. We used to have a lot of sea otters around here. They went extinct by 1912. They were reintroduced in the 70s and 80s from Alaska, a few dozen breeding pairs. We have about 1,000 right now, off the Olympic coast and the Strait of Juan de Fuca and a few in the islands. More than 50%? Well, let's get to 51%, and then we can talk, where north of that to go. But this also is very doable. People go, oh, is that realistic? Well, we produce 10 billion farm animals in this country. I'm sure we can produce 100 orcas, 1,000 sea otters a year, a couple hundred herons, a few hundred quality. I mean, if we decide, it's all about our design intention. And if we decide we want to design in a wildlife sanctuary, we have the power to do that. If we want to design something less desirable than that, then we can do that. I suggest we design, I like living in marine sanctuaries. I've been hanging in Santa Barbara a lot with the Channel Islands Marine Sanctuary. I like Monterey, Bay Area, and I just think living in marine sanctuaries is the way to go. So, one of the issues we have about, I'm still tracking down the exact number, 7 or 8 million people currently living in the whole watershed. So that's our community. There's lots of issues and opportunities with all those people. Hey, every one of us, great pollution, could be doing better, etc. But, we also have the power to make it all a marine sanctuary, bring the wildlife back, if we work together. So, to understand, it's not just, a happy name, marine sanctuary and stuff. Marine sanctuary is one of the easiest ways to understand what it is we can. There's certain elements of the United States marine sanctuary system that I think we want to emulate and build upon, but I don't want us to be limited by that. But there's a lot of law and grounding from which we can draw strength and wisdom. And one of them is, one of the best ways to understand how marine sanctuaries in the U.S. model works is, it's sort of like zoning for the sea. So instead of treating it like a frontier, like, hey, if you can kill it, it's yours. If you can destroy it, go ahead, You do zoning, which is you make a list of uses that are prohibited, like oil tankers, or, fracking, or, just whatever it is that you don't want. Rather than fighting these 1,000 fights and trying to persuade all these people to participate in all these programs, you just make a list. They become prohibited uses. They're just not allowed anymore. Like slaughterhouses aren't allowed in the neighborhood that you live in. They're prohibited, okay? So then you get to do conditional uses. Okay, well, here's some things that we might allow, like boating, swimming, fishing, and stuff. But there's conditions. There are limits, and we can all negotiate and discuss, what those are. And we get to design all of these things. You just write it down and make a treaty, and it becomes stuff. Then there's permitted uses, like, hey, anyone who wants to go swimming, anyone's going with their fishing pole, pull a fish, go home and eat it. Maybe that's permitted use. Anyway, all these can be negotiated, but it makes things clear. And it gives you the power to say what's prohibited instead of the U.S. government, for example, telling you you don't have the right to say no because of the Interstate Commerce Act or the Transportation Act or this or that. You have no right to say no to genetically modified organisms in your food, because you're preempted. In fact, this is the way the law works in the United States. All of those things preempt localities from prohibiting things like those, except as an exception under the Marine Sanctuary Act. Because the Marine Sanctuary Act creates an exception that allows you to preempt federal preemption. And it's pretty cool. Unfortunately, in the United States, it's administered by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is a division of the Department of Commerce. Which is why in the United States, even though we pioneered the concept of marine sanctuaries, we also have what I like to refer to as watered-down versions of marine sanctuaries. Because the foxes running the hen house, it's a nicer fox. It's not, it's a relatively nice fox, but it's the Department of Commerce, and there's actually a lot of talk about moving it over into the Department of the Interior. So it's not quite such a Jekyll and Hyde rule-making situation. Okay, so just now to kind of come to the federal or national or North American level to see the history behind us here, there are 14 marine sanctuaries that have been designated in North America so far. And they started in the early 70s. The last one that was designated by, there are 3 ways to designate a marine sanctuary in the United States. One is by NOAA, another is by Congress, and another it's not exactly a marine sanctuary, it's called a Marine National Monument. It's by presidential decree under the Antiquities Act. Those are the 3 ways. NOAA has been prohibited by an act of Congress from creating any new marine sanctuaries since the year 2000. That's why we don't have any new ones. And there's none under consideration. There's none on their list. But there was one marine sanctuary that was on their list as a top national priority that didn't get implemented. There's only one. And it was called... Anyway, it was the San Juan Islands National Marine Sanctuary. Not that many people know about it, but in the 80s and the 90s, NOAA was up there having groups and saying that we should take the San Juan Islands and the U.S. half of the Strait of Juan and make it a marine sanctuary. There was local pushback. I heard, actually, tribes, other people, they didn't like it. They didn't want the feds coming in here and telling us how to run our bioregion. And they kind of got rejected, and local acceptance is one of their things. So they went away. And that was the one marine sanctuary NOAA thought was a treasure, a national treasure that should be protected that didn't get that protection. If it had gotten that protection, many of the oil refineries that are polluting, the pulp mills, the chemical factories would not be here today. So we paid a high price by rejecting that designation. Of course, most of us didn't even know that it was going on. So who the hell rejected that? I'm not even quite sure. It was some small groups, and it just kind of happened. Okay, so now how do we fit into the context? Let's assume the Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary gets declared somehow, which we can talk about. Well, guess what? It will be the largest marine sanctuary in continental North America. By just a slight margin, it's 7,000 square miles, if we can find the definition of the saltwater, which we'll talk about. The next largest is the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, which most people have heard of, but they think that it is just Monterey Bay. But no, it's 30% of the coast of California. It goes all the way north of the Golden Gate Bridge, south past all of Silicon Valley, Monterey, all the way to Hearst Castle in northern San Luis Obispo County. It's hundreds of miles long by 150 miles wide. In fact, well, we'll get to California in a minute. So there's only one marine sanctuary. It's actually a national marine monument in the whole system that is larger than the Salish Sea, and that's Papahānaumokuākea in the northwestern of Hawaiian Islands. And it's 140,000 square miles, 20 times bigger than the South Sea. So we are not being unreasonable in our size. I mean, they're 20, and guess who did that? It's the one good thing he ever did. George Bush. And no one knows it. But he did that. So you know what? Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. So, thank you, George Bush. Got inspired by Jean-Michel Cousteau, who I've been having many meetings with about the Salish Sea on Santa Barbara, and he somehow inspired him, and he just did it. Okay, so California is a very important role model for us, and what I want to show you how reasonable this proposal is I want you to see, it's not a great image, I need to get the high-res graphic, but there are 4 marine sanctuaries in California. Channel Islands down by Santa Barbara, Monterey Bay, Gulf of the Farallones, Cordell Bank. Let's just consider it all one system. You can see most of them are adjacent. Well, when you add them together, it's 40% of the entire coast of California, out 150 miles into the ocean. And guess what? It's like the best part of California. I mean, it's like Santa Barbara to like Marin County and up to Mendocino. And our economy hasn't collapsed. So anybody tells you, oh, we do marine sanctuary, the economy's going to collapse. No, it just gets better. Because it attracts all the best and brightest people. The best and brightest people in the world. They want to live in marine sanctuaries. That's why they live there, you know. Okay, so guess what? They're so happy about the marine sanctuaries in California that underway right now, ready for completion next year, they're expanding these dotted lines to the marine sanctuaries, so it's going to now be 50% of the coast of California by next year. So that is a great role model for us. And it also shows how reasonable, maybe even modest, our proposal is. Because when you add up all the Californians, it's even a lot more than the Salish Sea. Here's the timeline, just to, time and space, right? So these are all the marine sanctuaries that have been done. And by the way, half of them are very small, under 1,000 square miles. In fact, Ronald Reagan did the smallest one. 1/4 of a square mile in Fagatella Bay in American Samoa. So Ronnie just wasn't a big thinker when it came to these sorts of things. But anyway, you can kind of see they were being done. This is the last one Noah did. This is the one Bush did. And here's the one we're going to do. And how are we going to do this? Well, here's the timeline. On 11/22/2012 was when I just very quietly published the website with the idea. But I only talked about it with friends and family, for a few months. And I've really only started speaking basically with the people in this room and then some folks from the Lummi Nation over the last 30, 60 days, basically. So it was all pretty new. 2013, maybe it'll slide to 2014, whenever ready, should they choose to do so. My hope and vision is that the Coast Salish nations, possibly in the context of the Coast Salish Gathering, which occurs 4 times a year, as I understand it, and or any other way they would like to organize it. But I would like to see it initially, in the same way that the Salish Sea was named the Salish Sea by the Coast Salish nations, I would like to see it taken to the next level and named the Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary by the Coast Salish nations first. After they have done so, and done the naming, espoused the philosophy, with better words and color than I can, then what I would like us to do, maybe as early as next year, hopefully no later than the following year, is I do not want to go to the government and ask for permission. I want us to go to the people. I want to involve the people. I want to make sure everyone understands what we're doing here. And I want everyone to pull the lever, yes or no. Should the Salish Sea be designated Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary? Yes or no. We're going to have to get the votes. We're going to have to put it on the ballot in Washington State and up in British Columbia. It's going to take a few $million per state to get this on the ballot, plus or minus with volunteerism. But it's a small price to pay. And then it's going to be out in a vote to people, and everyone's going to know what it is and what it means. And they're all going to feel like they made it happen. And then if anyone ever tries to undo it or water it down with bogus regulations or anything, they're going to defend it. Then we have 8 million people watching, or the majority of them, let's say. And it's also really important for implementation that we do it this way. We don't have, many people say, oh, why don't you just go to Obama and ask, he'll do it for the Coast Salish nations and so on. He just declared the San Juan Islands National Monument, 100 acres out of the things here. He obviously likes it out here. Just have him do it. Why go through all this trouble? He can do it through presidential proclamation, just like Bush did, Papahānaumokuākea. I'm like, no. Then we've given our power away again. Let's not do that. Let us do it. So that's my advice. We have the voters do it. Another reason why we really want to have the voters do it is because names are great, philosophies are great, memes are powerful. But you have to have the implementation. And a lot of the implementation is you got to convince people to not put draining down the toilet. not to put Tide in their laundry detergent instead of second generation, not putting bad toxic waste fertilizers on their lawn instead of converting to a garden. And so from all the little things, not having their car leaking, which I need to verify this, but a good friend of mine told me that the leaking cars that goes into the stormwater, that goes into the Salish Sea every year is equivalent to 2 Exxon Valdezes every year. Just that. Simple little things that the 8 million people can do. It's not just the big corporations that are making the pollution. It's the 8 million little mobile sources of pollution. And, we all need to tighten up a little bit. And I believe the only quick way to convince everyone is to involve them, and they believe that it's their marine sanctuary. And that they learn to respect that they live in a marine sanctuary, and they understand that they live in a marine sanctuary, then they'll start acting like it. And I believe that's what we've had down in California. A lot of people are being a lot less bad down there in a lot of ways. There's too many of them, which is a whole other subject. I don't have the solution for today, but here we go. This is just a little thing I want to mention, kind of switching over to the Salish Sea Coastal Trail aspect, which is also really important. It's not just the marine sanctuary, it's the coastal trail, which will also convey a lot more anthropocentric benefits. Which I don't want to become the main reason to do any of this, but for some people that will be the way to convince them. So, fine. Some of you may know or have walked on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, also in France known as the Way of St. James. This is an ancient pilgrimage, hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 or more. Anyway, people come from all over the world to walk these pathways. And I believe if we do the Salish Sea Coastal Trail along with the Salish Sea Marine Sanctuary in a very spiritual, mindful way, and people have great experience. They have community, they meet people from all over the world, they have meetings, they share food, it's a very international peace-producing thing. I think we can have that here, even more than we already do. Yes, we already have ecotourism as the second biggest industry in Washington State, after aerospace and Boeing. But guess what? After the Marine Sanctuary and Coastal Trail, it's going to become #1. And then it's going to go up 5-fold, 10-fold. And that will bring problems along with all the opportunities. But ecotourism is probably better than a lot of the alternative industries that we might attract. And that also is going to be key to not only helping ourselves and our community and our watershed, but helping the whole world. Because by giving them a reason and a way to experience the marine sanctuary and have a great time, that's how they're going to know how to go back to their watersheds and their community and emulate our success. And where they understand how we did it so quickly. 1, 2, 3 years. And it was like done. And then the implementation of follow. So we can also serve the entire world with this as a role model. That people need to think of their community as their watershed, and they need to organize their watersheds as sanctuaries, in my opinion. I guess I would like to close with just 5 little short dreams of a little friend of mine that kind of presented this to me on the 7th day of a juice fast recently. And I'm going to actually just go sit down and let you guys read this for 30 or 60 seconds. And then I thank you very much for your attention.
Outer dreams. All right.